Dear friends, we are traveling to a world lost in the mists of time, to those ancient years when the first sparks of the Ottoman Principality were lit. Imagine the birth of a principality in the quiet lands of Sugrat, in the shadow of emerald meadows and cool mountains. It seemed like just a small beginning, but who knew that this tiny spark would turn into a giant fireball on the stage of history? The beginnings of great epics are always humble, aren't they? Just like the Ottoman Principality that sprouted in the humble tents of Sogut. But there was something in the soul of this principality, something different from the others. It was a journey led by courage, patience, and big dreams. Carrying on the legacy of Ertugrul Gazi, Osman would need a world shaped around him with his own hands. Now let's go back to those days together. Let us follow the first steps of the principality led by Osman Gazi, a principality that grew with smart moves. This is not just a historical narrative. It is the story of a people's determination, a leader's vision, and the seed of an empire planted in the soil. But beware, dear friends, this story contains not only triumphs, but also frustrations and lessons. So how were those first steps taken? As the borders of the Ottoman Empire expanded, how did the great wheel that shaped the world begin to turn? Now, the real story begins. Oh, dear friends, can you hear the sounds of horseshoes echoing in the fertile soil of Sugut? As the wind rustles the leaves of ancient plane trees, the first steps of a principality that would change the course of history are being taken in these lands. This is where the Ottoman Principality took root, the land where that great plane tree first sprouted. But this story begins not like a star that suddenly shines, but like a carefully embroidered bright ribbon. Visualize the tired but dignified gaze of Ertugrul Gazi. He was the leader of the Kai tribe, a gentleman who protected his people with his bravery and wise decisions. But Ertugrul's eyes seemed to see a much bigger future on the horizon. On the dusty roads of those days, this small community within the Kai tribe was searching for a new direction in the shadow of the Seljuks' shattered legacy. In the midst of this search, Osman, the youngest son of Ertugrul Gazi, began to emerge as an emerging leader. Osman had won his father's favor with his courage and intelligence. But remember, dear friends, leadership is not just about waving a sword. Osman had earned the trust of his people. His sense of justice and diplomacy, taught to him from an early age, made him stand out from his brothers. After the death of Ertugrul Gazi, the Kai clan rallied around this young leader. Sometimes the stories of the elders overshadowed the steps of the young. But Osman had overcome this shadow and started to write his own story. Under Osman's leadership, this small principality in Sogut was not content with mere survival. Seizing the opportunities around him, Osman wisely forged alliances, recognized his enemies, and patiently prepared for conquest at a time when the Seljuk Empire was weakening. While preserving the ancient traditions of the Kai tribe, he began to build a new order. His dream was more than a small principality. An empire would be born on this land, but it was a secret that no one knew yet. Osman's leadership came not only from the power of his sword, but also from his intelligence, patience, and connection with his people. His people believed in Osman's justice and vision. But dear friends, Osman's epic story was only the beginning. What were Osman's first moves for this humble principality? How did this small tent city grow into the heart of an empire that would endure for centuries? The answers are hidden in a complex chess game of conquests and enemies. Now get ready to go deeper into this story. Oh, my friends, listen now to the echoes coming from the lands beyond Sugut. Osman Bey's steps are now stronger, his gaze more determined. He is a young leader, shaping the small principality he inherited from his father with his big dreams. But Osman was not only a ruler, he was also a dreamer, a man of action. The fate of the Ke tribe, united under the banner of Gaza, was beginning to turn into an epic with his vision. Osman Ghazi's first target was the tired but still dangerous Byzantine outposts. At the time, the Byzantine Empire was weakened and limited to small, disconnected settlements. These fortresses stood on the edge of Ottoman territory as both a threat and an opportunity. Osman took action with great patience and intelligence. One of his first conquests was the now familiar Karakahisar castle. Before conquering the castle, Osman gathered support from the surrounding villages and towns. His leadership was not only due to his sword power, but also to his ability to bring people together. The conquest of Karakahisar was seen as a tangible triumph of the Ottomans' ideology of Gaza, not just the gaining of a fortress. For Osman, Gaza was more than a policy of conquest. Carrying the banner of the Islamic faith, upholding the right and protecting the oppressed, was a way of life for him. Under Osman Ghazi's leadership, the veterans united for this sacred cause. Osman was not only a commander on the battlefield, but also a guide who gave morale and courage to his people. During the conquests, Osman skillfully used not only his sword but also his mind. While capturing Byzantine fortresses one by one, he took care to establish a peaceful relationship with the people of the region. One of his basic principles was to treat the inhabitants with justice. By gaining the trust of the people, he won not only the conquered lands, but also the hearts of the people. This approach played an important role in the growth of the Ottoman Principality. But dear friends, Osman Ghazi's conquests were not just about gaining territory. He created a strong ideology that held his people together. This order, built on justice, courage, and sacrifice, gave the people of the principality a sense of belonging. The Ottomans were no longer just a principality, but a community united around a common cause. This cause broadened the horizons of the Ottomans, encouraging them to take root in every land they conquered, broadening the conquests. But let's think about it now. Did Osman Ghazi's leadership grow out of his victories alone, or was his real strength in the deep vision behind the order he established, and his ability to bring people together? In our next story, we will explore more closely the secrets behind Osman's leadership and the legacy he left for generations to come. Get ready. The echoes of this epic are not over yet. Ah, dear friends, I will now tell you the story of a great change, the story of the Ottoman Principality, from a dream centered around nomadic tents to a powerful state on the verge of transformation. At the head of this transformation is a young leader, Orhan Ghazi, carrying his father's legacy. With the death of Osman Ghazi, a new sun was rising on the soil of Sugut. Orhan, who was both a father and a commander to his people, took the fate of the principality in his hands. Orhan Ghazi not only protected the legacy he inherited from his father, but also acted with great determination to grow, expand, and transform it into the powerful Ottoman Empire of the future. His first target was Bursa, which stood at the very heart of Ottoman territory and was of great importance due to its wealth and strategic location. Bursa was not just a city, but a symbol for both Byzantium and the Ottomans. This city, which Osman Ghazi had dreamed of for years, was now shining in Orhan Ghazi's target. Bursa, however, was not an easy target. The city was strongly defended as one of Byzantium's important garrisons. Orhan Ghazi planned a siege with patience and intelligence. This siege was a battle not only of swords and arrows, but also of time and patience. By laying siege around the city, Orhan prevented aid from reaching Byzantium and weakened the enemy with a prolonged attrition tactic. Meanwhile, the Ottomans captured the villages around the city, increasing their economic resources and gaining the support of the local population. The fall of Bursa took place on a warm spring day in 1326. When the Ottoman banner was hoisted on the city walls, it was not just a victory, but the beginning of a new era. Orhan Ghazi, fulfilling his father's will, declared Bursa the capital of the Ottoman Principality. This decision was not only a political move, but also a step that would strengthen the Ottomans economically and culturally. Bursa was the heart of the silk trade, the center of rich markets and fertile lands. Orhan Ghazi made the most of this opportunity, developing the city's infrastructure, encouraging trade and planting the roots of the Ottoman Principality deep into this fertile land. Under Orhan Ghazi's leadership, the Ottomans were not only gaining territory. His sense of war and just rule kept the people of the principality together and strengthened the loyalty to Ottoman rule in the newly conquered lands. Orhan, like his father, was a leader who managed to gain the trust of his people. With Bursa as the capital, the Ottoman Principality was rising not only as a military threat to Byzantium, but also as an economic and political rival. But friends, this is only the beginning. Under Orhan Ghazi's leadership, the Ottoman Empire was expanding, not only its territory, but also its spirit and identity. Now I ask you, how far can the Ottomans go under Orhan Ghazi's leadership? In our next story, we will continue to write this epic of conquests and new victories together. My dear friends, I will now take you back to that glorious period when the Ottomans marched triumphantly from one battle to another, from one castle to another. But these victories were the product of order and discipline, of strategy, not just the swords in the hands of brave soldiers. Under the leadership of Orhan Ghazi, the Ottoman Principality was expanding not only its territory, but also its understanding of the art of war. It was at this point that Orhan Ghazi took a step that would lay the foundation for all future Ottoman victories: the birth of an organized military system. Orhan Ghazi knew that the nomadic warrior tradition he had inherited from his father had to be reshaped according to the needs of a growing state. For he no longer faced only small Byzantine fortresses, but larger armies and more complex strategies. Orhan Ghazi therefore conceived the idea of building a disciplined army to protect his people and lead conquests. Thus began a new era in Ottoman military history. The formation of foot and Muslim troops. Soldiers formed the bases of the infantry. These were the first regular soldiers of the Ottoman army. Knowing how to use weapons and acting with discipline on the battlefield, these troops increased the endurance and flexibility of the Ottoman army. Muslims, on the other hand, consisted of mounted troops. With their speed and agility, they could both reconnoiter and devastate the enemy with surprising attacks. These soldiers were not only deployed on the battlefields, but also to maintain order in Ottoman territory. Thus, the Ottomans were able to establish a solid line of defense, both internally and externally. It is important to remember that Orhan Gazi was not only thinking about the battlefields when he established this regular military system. He wanted his soldiers to be not only brave, but also faithful, just and loyal individuals. For this reason, the foot and Muslim soldiers also lived in close contact with the people, gaining their trust and creating a spirit of solidarity within the principality. This army accelerated the expansion of Ottoman territories, while at the same time strengthening Ottoman authority in the newly conquered regions. With this new system, the Ottoman army was no longer just a defensive force, but also a force that led conquests. Their success during the conquest of Bursa proved the accuracy of Orhan Gazi's vision. The discipline and cooperation of the regular army led to the fall of Byzantine fortresses one by one. Orhan Gazi's move was the first step in the great conquests that the Ottomans would make towards Europe in the centuries to come. Now, dear friends, think. Did this army, organized by Orhan Gazi, respond only to the needs of the time? Or did it lay the groundwork for all the future glory of the Ottomans? In our next story, I will tell you how this army achieved new victories and accelerated the rise of the Ottoman Empire. Are you ready? We will continue to burn with the fire of conquests in our future story. Ah, my dear friends, I will now take you to one of the most important turning points in Ottoman history, the beginning of a great adventure that stretched from the borders of Anatolia to the interior of Europe. The capture of Santi Castle. This event was a turning point in the Ottoman destiny, a development that, while exposing the weakness of Byzantium, broadened the Ottoman horizons and redrew the course of its conquests. This story, which began in splendor, announced the footsteps of a power that had shaken Europe for centuries. A man named Al-Hamidil al-Zaw. In 1353, the Ottoman Empire was still young and dynamic. Under the leadership of Orhan Gazi, the Ottomans were conquering one conquest after another, opening the gates not only to Anatolia, but also to the weakened lands of Byzantium. The Byzantine Empire was in great chaos at the time. Internal conflicts, throne fights, and economic difficulties had weakened this antique empire. The Ottomans, on the other hand, saw this situation as an opportunity and skillfully managed their relations with Byzantium with clever strategies. The fruit of this strategy was the capture of the first permanent Ottoman territory in Rumelia, Chimpe Castle. Emperor Ioannis VI Cantacuzenius, who was sitting on the Byzantine throne, asked for help from Orhan Gazi in the internal struggle for the throne. The Ottomans sent troops to Byzantium and sided with Cantacuzenius in this struggle. However, this help would not go unrequited. You know that Orhan Gazi, as a wise leader, turned every move into a long-term game. You know that Orhan Gazi, as a wise leader, turned every move into a long-term game. So in order to repay its debt to the Ottomans, Byzantium had to cede Chimpe Castle, located at a strategic point on the Gallipoli Peninsula, to the Ottomans. This fortress was not won in battle, but through ingenious diplomacy and the growing influence of the Ottomans. Chim Castle was no ordinary castle, dear friends. This small castle was the Ottoman gateway to Europe. As the first permanent Ottoman territory to cross from Anatolia to Rumelia, it became the starting point for future conquests. This strategic move of Orhan Gazi went down in history as the first footprint of the Ottomans in Europe. Chim Castle was not just a fortress, it was a bridge to Rumelia, the first brick of the glorious empire the Ottomans would build in Europe. Using Simca Castle as a base, the Ottomans began to reconnoiter the surrounding Byzantine territory and target weak points. This first step into Rumelia gave Ottoman soldiers new courage and vision. More importantly, the Ottomans took advantage of Byzantium's weakness and internal turmoil to expand their influence. Byzantium was now living in the growing Ottoman shadow. The very fact that Emperor Kantakozenos ascended the throne with Ottoman support showed how weak Byzantium had become. While the Ottomans were lending a helping hand to Byzantium, they were also slowly infiltrating the lifeblood of this ancient empire. Think about it now, dear friends. How did this story, which started from a tiny castle, lead to the Ottoman conquest of Europe and the creation of an empire? How long could Byzantium hold out against the rise of the Ottomans? In the next installment, we will explore the Ottoman advance in Rumelia and how they entered the heart of the Balkans. Get ready, because this story is just beginning. My dear friends, now I will talk about another great turning point in the history of the Ottoman Empire, Murad I's accession to the throne, and how he consolidated the foundations of the state. This was the great period of time when the Ottoman Empire began to grow beyond a small principality into a state, its roots deepening and its branches reaching far and wide. Murad I ascended the Ottoman throne in 1362 after the death of his father Orhan Gazi. Now this may seem like an ordinary change of leader, but history shows us that every new leader opens a new page with his era. Murad did the same. He not only took the legacy he inherited from his father one step further, but also took permanent steps towards transforming the Ottoman Empire into a system state. For this reason, historians have given him the title of Hudavendigar, meaning great ruler. With Murad's accession to the throne, the foundations of institutionalization were laid in the Ottoman Empire. This institutionalization meant the transformation of a principality that grew only through conquests into a state capable of governing the conquered lands. Murad adopted a systematic approach to governance in order to ensure the welfare of the people, justice, and the continuity of the state. In this period, the foundations of Divani Humayun, one of the most important organs of the state, were laid. The Divani Humayun would function as the backbone of the Ottoman administrative mechanism. Here the Sultan, together with his viziers, would discuss the affairs of the state, seek solutions to the problems of the people, and determine future policies. This structure enabled the Ottoman Empire to make quick decisions and played a major role in establishing justice. While establishing this system, Murad Ayun also integrated his own understanding of sovereignty into this institutional structure. Justice and order were his most important principles, for Murad believed that a leader should not only be a conqueror, but also a ruler and protector. Of course, not only the Divani Humayun was established during this process of institutionalization, radical changes were also made in the military and administrative spheres. Murad did not only see the conquered lands as booty, he integrated them into the Ottoman administrative system. Every conquest meant more than winning a battle. It meant winning the hearts of the people and ruling with justice. And sometimes, for this reason, in the conquered territories, Qadis and Subasi, representing the Ottoman administration, were appointed to respond to the needs of the local population. Murad I's leadership is also important in terms of firsts in Ottoman history. During his reign, the advance in the Balkans accelerated. Edirne was annexed to the Ottoman lands and was declared the new capital. With Edirne becoming the capital, the direction of the Ottoman Empire turned more clearly towards Europe. For Murad, however, the demands on his son most of all were clearly towards Europe. For Murad, however, conquests were not only about gaining new territories. Each new territory was a test of the strength of the Ottoman institutional structure. This strong system established under his leadership paved the way for the centuries-long rise of the Ottoman Empire. Now think about it, my dear friends. What kind of legacy did these first steps in the process of transformation, from a principality to a state, leave for future Ottoman sultans? Were Murad I's moves towards institutionalization just the beginning, or were they the forerunner of the Ottoman period of glory? In the next installment, we will explore Murad's campaigns in the Balkans and the epics he wrote on those great battlefields. Get ready, because this story is getting bigger. Ah, my dear friends, let me take you to the misty mountains and cool plains of the Balkans, centuries ago. In those days, the Ottoman Empire was a young state just gaining strength. The story of a dynasty had just begun to be written. The first lines of a world domination had been penned. However, there were other powers on these lands. The kings of Europe and their allies who were disturbed by the Ottoman advance and wanted to stop this young state. This disturbance paved the way for a great battle that will go down in history as the Battle of Sirpsindiji. The year was 1364. Murad I was sitting on the Ottoman throne with determination and might. In the Balkans, the weakening presence of Byzantium allowed the Ottomans to expand. However, this expansion had become a threat to other states in the region. Especially the Serbian, Hungarian, and Bulgarian kingdoms came together to stop the ever-increasing power of the Ottomans. With the encouragement of the Pope, a crusading army was formed. This army was to be Europe's first major response to the Ottoman Empire. Their aim was to drive the Ottomans out of the Balkans and protect the Christian world from this Turkish danger. The Crusader army set off with great confidence. This force, united under the leadership of the Hungarian king Lajos, advanced through the Balkans and moved towards the Ottoman lands. The Crusaders thought that they would catch the Ottomans unprepared. Their confidence was so great that it was as if they had declared their victory even before the war began. But there was something they did not know. Murad I was not only a brilliant strategist, but also the speed and maneuverability of his army. The Ottomans watched the enemy silently, patiently, carefully, waiting for the exact moment. Everyone watched in silence. At last, the battle broke out on the banks of the Evros River. The Ottoman forces, led by their commander Hashi Ilbi, had prepared a formidable plan. The Crusaders were confident in the size of their army and their superior firepower. But the Ottoman army attacked unexpectedly and quickly. The raid, which took place in the dark of night, caught the enemy army completely unprepared. When the Ottoman soldiers quietly approached the Crusader camp and suddenly attacked, the enemy army panicked and did not know what to do. Crusaders fleeing along the banks of the Evros fell victim to both the darkness of night and the brutal attacks of Ottoman soldiers. Many of those who tried to escape drowned in the cold waters of the river. Historians see this victory as a testament to the superiority of Ottoman war tactics at the time. The Ottoman night raid was not only a physical victory, but also a psychological blow. By now, opponents of the Ottomans in the Balkans had learned to fear not only the armed might of this young state, but also its rational strategies. The Battle of Sangsin-Adendi was a turning point in which the Ottoman influence over the Balkans was cemented with the first major victory. This victory not only made the Ottoman presence in Europe permanent, but also changed the fate of the Balkan peoples. In the aftermath of Sanction Adendi, the Ottoman advance in the region accelerated and the state's roots in Europe deepened even further. The Ottoman Empire was no longer just a threat, but a reality to be reckoned with in the Balkans. So, my dear friends, what future battles did the Ottomans' great step into Europe with the victory at Sanctinidis open the door to? What kind of resistance would Murad I face as he continued to conquer the Balkan lands? In the next episode, we will discover the bloody saga of Kosovo and the most striking moments of this great ruler on the stage of history. Ah, dear listeners, I will now take you back to a day shaken by a pitched battle, a day that changed the destiny of history, a day of triumph and tragedy, an epic written in blood and courage. The year is 1389. We are in the era of the rise of the Ottoman Empire as it marches towards the heart of the Balkans. And the power of the Ottomans had become more palpable in the Balkans. This rise, however, was not to everyone's liking. Balkan peoples, kings and beys, were worried about this new power. And on that day, on the Kosovo plain, a battle would take place that would rewrite the fate of the Ottomans. Murad I was a courageous leader, a rational strategist, and a sultan who won the love of his people. Under his leadership, the Ottoman Empire became not only a state of conquest, but also a state of system and order. But Murad, like all great rulers, knew that conquests were won not only by the sword, but also by strategy and diplomacy. The Ottoman presence in the Balkans meant not only territorial expansion, but also the establishment of Ottoman order in these lands. This is why the Battle of Kosovo was to be a major turning point in the fate of the Ottomans. The plain of Kosovo had become a place where two giant armies faced each other. On one side, the Ottoman army led by Murad I, and on the other, the Balkan allies united around the Serbian despot Lazar. This alliance had come together as a last hope to halt the Ottoman advance in the Balkans. Before the war began, there was feverish preparation in the camps of both sides. The Ottoman army was brimming with defensive resolve. Everyone knew that the war would be won not only by the strength of the soldiers, but also by the intelligence of the commanders. The moment the battle began was one of the bloodiest in history. While the Ottoman soldiers were breaking through the enemy lines with the organized attacks of the vanguard troops, the Serbian army was resisting with all its might. The clash of swords, the neighing of horses, and war cries echoed across the Kosovo plain. Murad stood at the head of his army, encouraging his soldiers. But this battle was much more than an ordinary square battle. For the Ottomans, this victory would lay the foundations for a lasting power in the Balkans, but at a great cost. At the climax of the battle, the Serbian army began to retreat. The Ottomans' superior strategy had prevailed. However, as the war was about to end, an event took place that changed the course of both that day and Ottoman history. Miloš Obilić, one of Serbian Despotla's men, broke through the Ottoman ranks and reached Murad V's tent. He drew his sword and wounded the Ottoman ruler. Murad V resided on the plain of Kosovo. This was a victorious battle cast in a dark shadow. Murad's death was a profound loss for the Ottomans. But the state order and strong army he left behind were able to overcome the effects of this loss in a short time. The Battle of Kosovo was one of the first major battles in Ottoman history. This victory cemented the Ottoman dominance in the Balkans, but the martyrdom of Murad I left an unforgettable sadness. How would Yildirim Bayezid, who succeeded Murad, carry forward his father's legacy. What more victories would expand the Ottoman gates to Europe? This is the beginning of the stories we will talk about in the next episode. Are you ready? Dear friends, in the vast lands of the Ottoman Empire, it was not only the euphoria of victories that remained after conquests. Let me tell you, in the cool of a tired evening, by the fire where the flames danced, about a tremendous system the Ottomans established that would sustain the empire for centuries, the fief system. It was not just a form of administration. It was the embodiment of the idea of ruling conquered lands with justice that kept the state alive. But before I dive into the depths of my story, think about it. How could these lands, where thousands of raiders and janissaries set foot, be subjected to the orders of a single order? The Ottomans had found the answer to this question. After the joy of conquest mixed with dust, every castle, every town, every village stood before them like a riddle. It was not enough just to take the conquered lands. It was necessary to restore order, establish justice among the people, and mobilize the resources that would make the state strong. For this, the Ottomans developed a clever system, doesn't it? It was the one part of the kingdom that gave the people a voice, the honor to demand respect. Timar meant to take care, to look after carefully, because it was a system that looked carefully not only at the land, but also at the lives, property, and hopes of the people who lived on that land. The fief system was a breakthrough in Ottoman state administration. The conquered lands were not simply divided up or given to random individuals. No, these lands were given to the Ottomans' most trusted soldiers and administrators under the name of Timar. But don't think that this was like property ownership in today's sense, or a gift that brought personal wealth. No, on the contrary, it was a trust, a duty. The fief owner was an administrator who was to increase production and protect the people under his responsibility. The income from taxes was spent not only on meeting their personal needs, but also on raising soldiers for the Ottoman army. Imagine if the wheat from the fields, the taxes collected from the woodsheds, turned into the shields and armor of thousands of soldiers. With this system, the Ottoman Empire not only strengthened its treasury, but also protected and developed its lands like a wise statesman. As the fertility of the land increased, the people became more peaceful, the land more fertile, and the state more powerful. But one of the most subtle details of the story was this: the Ottoman understanding of justice. The fief holders could neither demand more nor act arbitrarily on the lands entrusted to them. The real owner of these lands was always the state itself. Fief holders who acted unjustly were quickly dismissed and deprived of their duty to ensure justice. This strict but fair supervision kept the fief system free from corruption and corrupting. End of chapter 21. But the magic of a story is in the details, isn't it? In the Ottoman fief system, not only the economy, but also the military order was alive and well. Each fief holder was required to keep a certain number of soldiers, or sebeles, ready. When war broke out, these sebeles would put on their swords, mount their horses, and become part of the army. This was how the Ottomans managed to transform the people, production, and power of the conquered lands into a military system. Prosperity through justice laid the groundwork for victories on the battlefield. My friends, the fief system was not only a solid Ottoman bridge between the soldier and the people, but also a bond of trust between the people and the state. But we return to the question I posed at the beginning of this narrative. Did such an elaborate system always work flawlessly? How well did this system survive the changing conditions of the times and the rise of the Ottoman Empire? We will find the answer to that in the future. Ah, dear friends, the ancient story of the Ottoman Empire is not only full of conquests and victories. What made this great empire strong for centuries was that it knew how to raise not only flags, but also hearts in the conquered lands. Let's take a journey together towards the Ottoman governance policies in the Balkans and the real secret behind their conquests. Because the Ottomans, who entered these lands with the sword, managed to settle in the hearts of the people with justice. The Balkans, oh, what ancient lands! A mosaic geography that once lived in the shadow of Byzantium, with Latins, Slavs, Greeks, and many other nations. When the Ottomans set foot on these lands, of course, they did not just build wooden bridges or stone castles, but they also aimed to reach the hearts of the local people, because conquest was not only about drawing borders, but also about winning the people. The Ottoman policy in the Balkans also served this purpose. But wait, dear friends, don't think it was just politics. Ottoman rule was a moral teaching, dedicated to understanding the language and culture of the people and living with them. And even if the king couldn't explain all of the reasons for his policies, you can doubt that he took what he did in these newly conquered territories. The first thing the Ottomans did was to respect the local people's beliefs, their way of life, and even their system of governance, in order not to disturb their peace. Imagine an Ottoman army arriving at the gates of a village and not touching the fields, crops, or temples of the people living there, but rather securing them. Churches were not destroyed after the conquests. On the contrary, they were protected and the religious freedom of the people was recognized. This is where the Ottomans showed their soft power to unite different faiths and nationalities under one banner. The local population quickly realized that this new order was not only a regime of conquest, but also a manifestation of justice. Ah, speaking of justice, another thing as fascinating as the Ottoman banner was its courts. Qadis were immediately appointed in conquered regions. Qadis would listen to the complaints of the local people, resolve disputes, and run the judicial mechanism. The Ottoman concept of justice was so remarkable that sometimes even non-Muslims would turn to the Ottoman Qadi instead of their traditional leaders. Wasn't this the clearest indication of how robust the concept of justice was, which was popularly referred to as the Ottoman scales? The more people saw this system that prioritized justice over their own interests, the more they trusted the Ottomans and saw them not as invaders, but as saviors. The Ottomans did not only become a state that dispensed justice, it also became a state that valued the presence of the people in the administration. Local rulers, i.e., former dynasty members or influential people, were kept in office if they showed loyalty to the Ottomans. Sometimes the Ottomans even integrated them into their own administrative system and included them in the Tahrir books. Thus, for the local population, governance did not seem like a major change. It was merely a substitution of chaos for tranquility. This local cooperation was one of the strongest elements in the Ottoman Empire's ability to both maintain order and establish a long-lasting dominance in the Balkans. Of course, the Ottoman masterstroke was to understand the unique nature of each community. Greeks, Serbs, Albanians, each had its own cultural traditions, and the Ottomans preferred to accept these differences in their own colors rather than suppress them. This so-called millet system allowed each community to live according to its own religious and social rules. While the churches met the religious needs of the people, they also served as a bridge with the Ottoman administration. This allowed the Ottoman administration to penetrate deeply into the lives of the people of the region, while at the same time leaving their sense of freedom untouched. It has been suggested that these French instructors were helping to inspire the Ottoman Navy into fighting the Caribbean settlements. Dear friends, this balanced policy of the Ottomans in the Balkans was not only a method of conquest, but also an art of winning people. But tell me, could this colossus, which had risen with a policy of justice and winning hearts and minds, adapt to the changing world order? And this is where the real story begins. Dear friends, as we move through the dusty pages of history, it is impossible not to recount how Europe was shaken by the rise of the Ottoman Empire. As the saying goes, when a plane tree rises towards the sky, those in its shadow feel both admiration and fear. The Ottoman expansion into Europe was characterized by precisely these feelings. At some point, however, this fear turned into a desire to resist, pushing admiration into the background, and so the old spirit inherited from the Crusades was rekindled. This time the target was not the Holy Lands in the east, but the borders of the Ottoman Empire. As the Ottomans took over the Balkans step by step with their conquests, anxious whispers rose from the castles of nobles in Europe. For this new power was not only occupying territory, but also winning the hearts and minds of the local population. Recognizing this danger, Europe initially tried to counter it with individual efforts. However, kings and nobles, realizing that they could not cope with the Ottoman power alone, finally decided to come together and form a coalition. It was at this point that an alliance was born on the grand stage of history, the first major Crusader coalition organized against the Ottomans. There was no discussion of personal rights. Such discussions are premature and unsafe. Imagine, dear friends, it was not an easy task for different kingdoms, principalities, and city-states to unite for a common cause, despite all their differences. Europe at that time was very fragmented both politically and religiously, but in the face of the Ottoman Empire, this fragmentation was a luxury. As the Pope's envoys traveled all over Europe calling for unification, this alliance suddenly turned into a holy struggle under the spell of a religious mission. It was not only a matter of defending their territory, but also of protecting the honor and existence of Christendom. Legend has it that one of the most influential figures in the formation of this alliance was the voice of the Pope himself. The papacy persuaded the peoples of Europe to see the Ottomans as a gigantic threat from the East, and created a sense of unity through this enmity. But, dear friends, history is not only written with great armies and great battles, it is also shaped by the dreams, ambitions, and fears behind them. Each lord, each prince played a role in this coalition, not only in the name of religion, but also in the name of his own political future. Every victory, every loss, would rewrite their destiny. And what about the battlefields? What strategy did the Ottomans follow in challenging this alliance that had formed against them? After all, it was not a single enemy, but a force speaking different languages, flying different flags, but united for a single goal. For the Ottomans, this was no ordinary conflict. This struggle that started in the Balkans was a test of how far the Ottoman Empire could stretch, how far it could resist. But remember, dear friends, the Ottoman Empire was a master not only on the battlefield, but also in diplomacy and mind games. Could this grand crusader coalition really pose a threat to the Ottoman strategy? Finding the answer is not an easy task. But in the next story, we will talk more about this great struggle and how the Ottomans developed a defense. But I would like to end by asking this question. Can an empire surrounded by alliances survive by relying on its sword alone? Or is there another secret? Dear friends, listen well, because now I am going to tell you one of the turning points of history, the story of a might that was born and renewed after a painful period of disintegration. You know the period of conquest, when dark clouds hovered over the Ottoman Empire, right? Those difficult days when brother turned against brother. After those days, the Ottoman Empire was reborn from its ashes. The year 1413, Celebi Mehmet, who won the struggle for the throne, was turning a new page as the ruler of the Ottoman Empire. He had developed a patiently woven strategy to unite his own people and to intimidate his enemies once again. The period of conquest had severely shaken the Ottoman authority in the Balkans. Everyone from Byzantium to the Hungarian kingdom, from the Serbian Despotate to other Balkan principalities, tried to take advantage of the Ottoman decline. Local resistance increased, and the loyalty of those who accepted Ottoman authority was questioned. But Celebi Mehmet, with his intelligence and mastery of diplomacy, used not only his sword, but also his pen, so much so that, while suppressing the rebellions, he sent letters to the Balkan leaders, persuading them to live under Ottoman patronage. By pursuing a policy of respecting the concerns and cultural habits of the peoples in the region, Mehmet Khan conquered not only territory, but also hearts. The Balkans were not only a military theater for the Ottomans. This geography was an opportunity for the construction of a new order. Rising again during the reign of Celebi Mehmet, the Ottomans began to establish a system that would ensure justice and peace in the places they conquered. The administrative structures and social order created during this period softened the prejudices against the Ottomans among the Balkan peoples. Celebi Mehmet's administrative approach proved that the Ottoman Empire was not only an empire of conquest, but also the bearer of a lasting civilization. In the conquered territories, the territorial order was restructured, taxes were set fairly, and all this restored stability in the region. What is really interesting, dear friends, is that this resurgence of the Ottoman Empire had a long-term impact on the Balkans and even on Europe. The Ottoman Empire not only established its own administrative system in the Balkans, but also profoundly influenced the social and cultural structure of Europe. The Ottoman millet system was remarkable for the way it managed different ethnic and religious groups together. It is possible to see traces of this model in the Balkans. The idea that communities of different faiths could live together was one of the Ottoman legacies. In addition, the Ottoman Empire influenced many areas of the Balkan peoples, from art and music to cuisine and daily life. For example, the Ottoman market culture is still alive in the identity of Balkan cities today. In this geography on the Silk Road, trade flourished, interaction between peoples increased, and in a way, the Ottomans strengthened the economic fabric of Europe through the Balkans. Of course, every rise is met with resistance. The Ottoman influence in the Balkans was met with both curiosity and reaction in Europe. In the courts of European kings, the rise of the Ottoman Empire was a source of deep concern and led to new plans. So, what was Europe going to do in the face of this rapid rise of the Ottoman Empire? In the next chapter, I will describe this interaction between the Ottomans and Europe and the new struggles that began in the post-Celebi Mehmet period. But I can't help thinking about this, dear friends. When an empire is on the rise, don't other powers try to undermine it? Ah, dear friends. Today, I will take you to a slightly more volatile period of our history, to the salt-scented waters of the Mediterranean Sea. As the saying goes, the sea is not only a vast body of water, but also a stage for races, conflicts, and alliances between nations. It was on this stage that the Ottomans were confronted for the first time with the ancient maritime republics of Venice and Genoa. While the land borders of the Ottoman Empire were expanding, it was unthinkable for its power at sea to be overshadowed, wasn't it? With the conquest of Istanbul, the Ottomans opened both the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, and were no longer only interested in conquests, but also in supremacy over the sea trade routes. At that time, the Mediterranean was in the hands of the Venetians and Genoese, who controlled trade routes worth their gold: olive oil, spices, textiles, even silk from the east. In every port through which these valuable goods passed, you could find a Genoese inn or a Venetian merchant. It was inevitable that the Ottomans would compete for these roads, but the competition would not be a friendly one. At first, the Ottomans aimed to establish order in order to control maritime commercial mobility. However, Venice in particular saw these Ottoman moves as a threat. This led to the first military conflicts that went beyond trade. The first activities of the Ottoman navy in Gallipoli and the Aegean led to clashes with Genoese and Venetian ships. Although the Sultan saw these engagements as a show of strength, for the inexperienced Ottoman navy at sea, each battle held bitter lessons. However, one of the most important characteristics of the Ottoman Empire was its ability to learn from war and rapidly improve. These conflicts went down in history as the period when the foundations of Ottoman seafaring were laid. Remember, dear listeners, it was not only the seas that were in conflict, but also the economy. The Ottomans had put considerable pressure on the European economy by seizing the trade routes in the Balkans. The Ottoman lands between East and West were like a bridge that traders had to cross. The taxes collected from this passage filled the state treasury. Ports, markets, and inns were revitalized. Especially cities such as Thessalonica, Edirne, and Istanbul were transformed into trade centers. This not only strengthened the Ottoman Empire, but also alarmed the seafaring nations of Europe. The rise of the Ottomans threatened their economic and political balance. What about the peoples of Europe? How did they see the Ottomans? While many merchants benefited from the Ottoman markets, it was also true that some were fearful. In European courts, Ottoman influence on both land and sea was being debated, and alliances to counter it were being planned. This competition in the Mediterranean was now on the agenda not only of merchants, but also of monarchs and kings. But this story of the rise of the Ottoman Empire was like a ship on a steady course, sailing with the wind at its back, ready to break the waves. Ah, dear friends. In this period when the Ottoman Empire first began to exert its influence on the seas, the question was, could the Ottomans, having strengthened their navy, build an empire in the Mediterranean? If you want to learn about these struggles over the seas, don't miss listening to the next episode. Let's see if this naval battle is just a rivalry or the beginning of a much bigger showdown. Ah, friends, now I will take you to the lush green valleys, steep mountains, and sad history of the Balkans. The Ottoman Empire's policy of conquest was not only an epic written with swords. The effort to establish a just order in the conquered lands transformed the Ottoman Empire from a conquering empire into an order-building state. This was especially evident in the Balkans. The adaptation of the Balkan peoples to Ottoman rule was not only out of necessity, but also due to the Ottoman understanding of justice and tolerance. The Ottomans showed great respect for the traditions, languages, and beliefs of the peoples living in the lands they conquered. This was not a new yoke, but the beginning of a new order. When Christian peoples saw that their churches were left untouched, that they cooperated with local rulers, and above all, that they were treated equally before the law, they began to see Ottoman rule as a liberation from the old feudal lords who were burdening them with heavy taxes. For instance, with the Timar system, the Ottomans took control of the functioning of the land, and the local population became a part of this system. The rigid and oppressive order of the old feudal system was being dissolved and replaced by a more orderly and equitable structure. But how was this harmony achieved? The secret of the Ottomans was to keep the lands they conquered through bloodshed, by conquering hearts. Of course, as part of this order, the influence of Islamic culture became increasingly visible. Rather than pursuing a policy of imposing Islam by force, the Ottomans preferred to encourage it through exemplary living. Islamic morality and culture, especially in Ottoman cities, soon began to permeate daily life in the Balkans. In the marketplaces, a Christian merchant on one side and a Muslim shopkeeper on the other were side by side, seeking a fair profit. This blend shaped not only the identity of the Ottoman Empire, but also that of the Balkans. Mosques, tekkas, and madrasas became the silent messengers of a new faith. But the Ottoman influence on the Balkan peoples was not limited to a religious one. Europe's political order had taken a completely different path with the rise of the Ottomans. The Ottoman expansion into the West dislodged Europe's traditional feudal system and provided an example of a centralized structure that concentrated the wealth of the countryside. As European monarchs watched the Ottoman military and administrative power, they began to recognize the weaknesses in their own systems. Feudal principalities weakened, national armies and royal treasuries began to emerge. The seeds of the modern European state system were being sown in the shadow of the Ottoman Empire. Oh, yes. And at this point, friends, the Ottoman Empire was not just a conquering state, but an actor that contributed to the reshaping of Europe. The order it established in the Balkans inspired the transformation of Europe itself. The Ottoman Empire shaped not only the land, but also the minds of the people and the future. Now I leave you with the question, what more profound changes would the Ottoman Empire pioneer in this historic dance between East and West? We will talk about these in the next episode. Stay tuned, dear friends.